Hello, and welcome to Storytelling Live. Tonight is the first in, pre-recorded. Well, I wanted to premiere this. I didn't know how else to do it. I'm glad to see you there. Um, you know how to get a hold of me. Can't wait to hear from you. Welcome everyone to Storytelling Live. Here's where I read stories long form. This isn't a quick YouTube fix or makeup type of prep or something like that. This is literature from dusty old moldy pages that I have dug up from the annals of from the way back area of the library stacks. Right? Just imagine it, if you will, and come with me, step with me down this road. We're going to talk about Arthur Conan Doyle tonight. How great was he? I have his books up there in my shelf somewhere. Let me see here. Let's see. Right there. Got all the stories and the annotations and the photos from the original Strand and all that. And all that's right next to... Oh, well, that's Mr. Hyde, if you guys have been following our series. And, there's other stuff up there, too. I just wanted to talk about the phenomenon of the amazing intellect and how it is like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a noise? Is it completely silent? Or does it just run through the procedures of decoding a crime scene on its own, there amongst the ferns, right? Checking out the snails. And, well, what am I talking about? I'm talking about a tree falling in the forest, but at the same time, I'm talking about the amazing intellect of Sherlock Holmes and how this is the premise of every story. It is mostly, or most stories of the Holmes, the original Holmeses that were written by Arthur Conan Doyle and published in the Strand. You know what I'm saying? It takes a great intellect, takes an enjoyer to show us what's so amazing about that intellect, and an appreciator, right? And so Watson is the appreciator. And how familiar are you with Watson? Kind of, sort of, very, probably. There was the recent Sherlock with Humperfield Cumbersnatch. No, I love those guys. That was a fun series. The Game's Afoot, loved it. That was a lot of fun, really cool. I wasn't, I kind of dug what they did with, anyway. So the company came back and made another series. We won't talk about that tonight. But in any case, so I like that very much. And but what I'm trying to say is that in this part of what we enjoy about Holmes, the Holmes stories, is the enjoyment of the amazing intellect of Sherlock Holmes. And how amazing was it? He was the detective who didn't give a damn about whether or not the Earth spun around the sun, or orbited the sun, or whether the Earth, or whether the sun orbited around the Earth. He didn't give a damn about the solar system and the positions of the planets or anything like that. But he did care very much about the difference between qualities of ash from people's cigars or cigarettes. Excuse me, mostly cigar ash, I think. Pipe ash is what he wrote. He'd written a paper on it, and I think that comes up I'm not sure. I'm not. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to think that I'm going to venture to guess that it was in Study in Scarlet, where we learned about him through Watson's eyes, and so the great intelligence needs an appreciator, and that was, bless his soul, such was the man of Arthur Conan Doyle. He was an extreme appreciator of intellect and also of fantasy and magic. And that's all for that. And goodbye. No, no, man. If you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. This is tonight. I'll sum it up real quick. I wanted to say introductory. I'm going to go now into the bio. I've got some notes that I'll pull up soon and read them. It's taken from the Wikipedia, so you can just look it up yourself, but then after that, we'll read the adventure of the Speckled Band, and it's a cute one, and a nice little tidy tale, and so it's not. Well, they're all involved with the entire story arc, but never mind that. What I wanted to say is that we're gonna listen to the first part tonight, and next week we'll have the second part. And perhaps if I can figure out how to run my channel correctly, we'll do that live and do that together. But if not, I might have a birthday party to go to next week, so I'm not sure what's going on, but I will see you either way. And I'm glad you're out there. And like always, drop me a line, say hi, I love it. And I miss you. I miss you all. We have been reading constantly, consistently, every week, every Saturday. It used to be on my Facebook page, and now it's going to be here. We've been going since the beginning of the outbreak of COVID. And the outbreak of COVID didn't scare us, but when the lockdowns started happening and it started really changing our lives, that first Saturday, it was like in March or something of 2020, that's when I started doing this. And I've been up every week since. And this series has had a loyal following of friends, and they old and new, and they come from all over, and they drop in and say hi, or they sit for the whole thing. And what I tell people is that this is our blanket fort of the mind, and I want you to settle down, get a sweet beverage of something of your choice. It's a hot tea, it's a cold tea, it's what do you got, a toddy, or whatever you like. It's your choice. Make yourself comfortable. I'm not in comfortable clothes right now. I'm being strangled by a wonderful tie, but that's for the presentation of this entire story tonight. And I usually wear some kind of something nice. I mean, I guess I change my clothes. So, like most humans, I change my clothes. Any case, Sir Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle. So people think his last name was Conan Doyle, but he actually was. His last name's Doyle, and his middle name is Conan, I think. And so he was a British writer and medical doctor, but born in Edinburgh, Scotland, much like Stevenson, Lewis Stevenson. And one thing you'll have to know is that usually when I get on camera, I forget everything that I was about to say, that I had planned, thinking the whole time. So this is me, rambling bastard. So, born in 1859, died in 1930. So the first one was, he created this, I'll just say, so he created the character Sherlock Holmes in 1887 for the story A Study in Scarlet, the first of 4 novels and 56 short stories about Holmes and Dr. Watson. So Sherlock Holmes stories are generally considered milestones in the field of crime fiction. But if you've hung with me before, you know that I champion Poe over and Auguste Dupin over Holmes in a pinch, because that was 1840, I believe, or something like that. It was super early. He had written, actually, Goldbug was like in, was Gold, how early was Goldbug? That was also perhaps the very, 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 very first um, piece of deductive fiction. And he had actually invented, Poe invented the what he called backwards thinking or ratiocination, or not deduction, but he called it induction at the time. So what we're looking at is I have something. If I have like a thread hanging from my nose, you've got to write and tell me, and I'll find out a week later. So, ratiocination, backward thinking, looking at like a crime scene is in disarray, of course, unless he's got a kind of a neat freak, or you know what I'm saying. They don't put things back in order; they take things out of order. So it's like an explosion. So backward thinking is this thing that sort of a method that Poe made up in like 1830 or something like that, for figuring out how the objects actually got to where they are. That hadn't been done before. Not before Poe. That was it. That was the beginning. Figuring things out by looking at, and that's deductive. That's what Holmes or Conan Doyle calls deductive reasoning. And at the same time, empirical medicine was also trying to figure out the same kind of thinking, looking at a human body and looking at symptoms and trying to deduce what the sickness is. Doyle was a prolific writer. Other than Holmes stories, his works include fantasy and science fiction about Professor Challenger and humorous stories about the Napoleonic soldier Brigadier Gerard, as well as plays, romances, poetry, nonfiction, and historical novels. One of Doyle's early short stories, J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement in 1884, helped to popularize the mystery of the Mary Celeste. In addition to the Holmes stories and novels, he was a prolific author, and one of the most celebrated works was The Lost World, a science fiction novel published in 1912. So, Wells had already kind of done like The Time Machine and things, so he kind of got a jump on actual science fiction. But, that's when, this whole period is when science fiction's getting born, deduction, detective stories are being born, and the great, wonderful monsters whom we love and enjoy to this day, such as Frankenstein and all those vampires. Actually, there was a vampire born at the same time that the monster of Frankenstein was born, written by John Polidori, who was there at the chalet in Geneva on the same night and with the same group of people that Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley was, with the Romantic poets. And likewise, born out of a nightmare was Robert Louis Stevenson saw the vision of Jekyll turning into Hyde in Nightmare. And so nightmares. And what are these nightmares, happening that just turn into indelible features of our culture? And modern mythology, and why is it so indelible at this moment in time? It's something for further research, unless someone's done it already and I haven't read that paper yet. You know what I'm saying? But I'm involved in other things, and I'm doing this whole thing as just a wonderful pastime to sort of keep us company here on Saturday nights when we have nothing to do during COVID time. If you are out cavorting, then you won't see this, but maybe you can watch it on a different night, and you'll see it at some point. But basically, we're all trapped inside on Saturday nights. And so I thought, why not just start this series? So, jumping back. So, The Lost World, science fiction, in 1912, concerning an expedition to a plateau on the Amazon basin of South America, where prehistoric animals still survive. It was originally published serially in the Strand magazine, just like Holmes. I want to mention also a few things about Doyle. Well, there's a lot to say about Doyle. I'm not going to say it. You can go ahead, see the Wikipedia article for yourself, but I'm just going to say he was a great athlete, an avid cricketer, Doyle, and an amateur boxer, a pugilist. And now I'm starting to make my case for, Watson is a great appreciator of great intellect. Doyle is a great appreciator of great intellect. Watson was a boxer. He also was a soldier, and I wanted to find out in Afghanistan. So I wanted to find out that Doyle was a soldier in Afghanistan as well, but he was not. But basically, Watson is Doyle. If you ever see Watson depicted in the movies not being tall and biggish with a boxer, kind of pushed in boxer nose and a big walrus mustache, and a cane and a hat, that's Watson. But that's also Arthur Conan Doyle. From 1876 to 1881, Doyle studied medicine in Edinburgh. I'm skipping. He began writing short stories, submitted to Blackwood. The Haunted Grange of Goresthorpe was actually rejected from Blackwood. He also wrote on spiritualism. Spiritualism was great and big at that time, starting in about 1840 in America with the Fox sisters in New York, the state of New York, upstate New York, where they found that they could sit on a table and then hear raps. That was called a rap. And so they toured the world, really, almost literally. They were getting a lot of information from the other side, and I wanted to say that not only was he into spiritualism and spirits and seances, which actually drew him to Houdini. I'll talk about that in a second, but it also opened him up to the world of fairies, and he wrote about fairies. If you have the time, you can look me up on Tumblr. You can find that on my website. The website is written somewhere on this page. If not, I'll write it. You'll find me. But I have collected avidly over the years spiritualist photography from the 19th century, because it's from the first days of photography. They discovered, double exposure. And they would have, let's say this is a piece of cotton or something like that. They would have, somebody with a piece of cotton, hanging out of their snoot, and what's that? That's ectoplasm, and so there was this trick photography, and it was documenting seances, and it was supposed to be documenting, these amazing happenings that were going on. At the same time, people were photographing little little fairy people in, like now my napkin, or this, when it's not, well, anyway, this piece of fabric here is like a log, and they would like take a picture of a log and then superimpose maybe either little dolls, or they would have young women in costume, and then they would shrink them down and put them on there. So Doyle saw these photographs, and he was quite the appreciator. He was, bless his heart, he was a bit naive, but he also wanted to believe in the fantastic, and that's wonderful. So, I mean, I don't think he was misguided. I think he was an amazingly intelligent, incredibly intelligent man. But he had his beliefs, and he wanted to, I just think that I don't know. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just telling you it's very interesting, and that's how it was. So Doyle was friends for a time with the American magician Harry Houdini. Even though Houdini explained that his feats were based on an illusion and trickery, Doyle was convinced that Houdini had supernatural powers, and said as much in his work. He wrote a piece called The Edge of the Unknown. Houdini's friend, Bernard Ernst, recounted a time when Houdini had performed an impressive trick at his home, in Doyle's presence. Houdini had assured Doyle that the trick was pure illusion, and had expressed the hope that this demonstration would persuade Doyle not to go around endorsing phenomena simply because he could think of no explanation for what he had seen other than supernatural power. But according to Ernst, Doyle simply refused to believe it had been a trick. Houdini became a prominent opponent of the spiritualist movement in the 1920s. And actually, that was way after it had super blasted its way through American and British culture. Remember, people are listening to spirits for the other side. Um, uh, 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 there's a man. He was a French spiritualist, and I have his book, and I was reading it the other night, and because we're on camera now, I can't remember his name. Kardec. Alan Kardec was asking, in the 1870s, 80s, was asking his 1,000 questions to these different psychics, because, started with the Fox sisters, but then all of a sudden psychics started cropping up everywhere, right? And it was all the rage. And, of course, that's when, fish scales and cobwebs were the decorative norm in architecture, right? So Alan Kardec was out there collecting proof, writing this numbers of books, saying, I have asked all these unconnected psychics the same questions, and I'm getting the same answers. Well, here is the proponent. Here are the most popular answers, and so he wrote books on that, and it's really quite amazing. And Kardec is still very, very influential in Brazil, for example, today, and because apparently he had discovered the truth of angels. Okay, that's a longer story. But anyway, so spiritualism was pretty dang serious in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s. Now we're talking about Blavatsky and the the Theosophists, right? And there are people. So Houdini becomes a prominent opponent of the spiritualist movement in the 1920s. So it was already really big and mature and well established, the whole industry. And so that made a big point. And so after the death of his beloved mother, he insisted that spiritualist mediums employed trickery and consistently exposed them as frauds. The differences between Houdini and Doyle eventually led to a bitter public falling out between them. So that's really all I wanted to say about Doyle, just at the beginning of this. And I just want you to know about Doyle because he's just an amazing man. it's a great character or human to research. So I encourage you to do further research on that. The Adventure of the Speckled Band. So I'm going to read a little bit of this now, and then I'll read a little bit next week, and we'll go like that, okay? Please, enjoy your wonderful beverage. I'm playing with a little toy over here. And some paper clips. That's what desks are, man. I got some batteries up here. That's my desk, man. So you'll hear them. Hope you're doing well. Hope everyone's okay. And I hope you're comfortable. Because this is the adventure of the Speckled Band. On glancing over my notes of the 70-odd cases in which I have during the last 8 years studied the methods of my friend Sherlock Holmes, I find many tragic, some comic, a large number merely strange, but none commonplace, for working as he did rather for the love of his art rather than for the acquirement of wealth, he refused to associate himself with any investigation which did not tend towards the unusual and even the fantastic. Of all these varied cases, however, I cannot recall any which presented more singular features than that which was associated with the well-known Surrey family of the Roylotts of Stoke Moran. The events in question occurred in the early days of my association with Holmes, when we were sharing rooms as bachelors on Baker Street. It is possible that I might have placed them upon record before, but a promise of secrecy was made at the time, from which I have only been freed during the last month by the untimely death of the lady to whom the pledge was given. It is perhaps as well that the facts should now come to light, for I have reasons to know that there are widespread rumors as to the death of Dr. Grimsby Roylott, which tend to make the matter even more terrible than the truth. It was early in April, in the year 1883, that I woke one morning to find Sherlock Holmes standing, fully dressed, by the side of my bed. He was a late riser as a rule, and as the clock on the mantelpiece showed me that it was only 7:15, I blinked up at him in some surprise, and perhaps just a little resentment, for I was myself regular in my habits. "Very sorry to knock you up, Watson." Well, of course, back then, to be knocked up was to be disturbed, right? Okay, right? So, means something else today, sir, people, and we all know that, but it's not that now. "So, very sorry to knock you up, Watson," said he, "but it's the common lot this morning. Miss Hudson has been knocked up. She retorted upon me, and I on you." What is it then, a fire?" "No, a client. It seems that a young lady has arrived in a considerable state of excitement, who insists upon seeing me. She is waiting now in the sitting-room. Now, when young ladies wander about the metropolis at this hour of the morning and knock sleepy people up out of their beds, I presume that it is something very pressing which they have to communicate. Should it prove to be an interesting case, you would, I am sure, wish to follow me from the outset. I thought, at any rate, that I should call you and give you the chance." "My dear fellow, I would not miss it for anything." I had no keener pleasure than in following Holmes in his professional investigations, and in admiring the rapid deductions, as swift as intuitions, and yet always founded on a logical basis, with which he unraveled the problems which were submitted to him. I rapidly threw on my clothes and was ready in a few minutes to accompany my friend down to the sitting-room. A lady dressed in black and heavily veiled, who had been sitting in the window, rose as we entered. "Good morning, madame," said Holmes cheerily. "My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my intimate friend and associate, Dr. Watson, before whom you can speak as freely as before myself. Ha! I'm glad to see that Mrs. Hudson has had the good sense to light the fire. Pray draw up to it, and I shall order you a cup of coffee, for I observe that you are shivering." "It's not cold which makes me shiver," said the woman in a low voice, changing her seat as requested. What then? It is fear, Mr. Holmes. It is terror. She raised her veil as she spoke, and we could see that she was indeed in a pitiable state of agitation, her face all drawn and grey, with restless, freighted eyes like those of some hunted animal. Her features and figure were those of a woman of 30, but her hair was shot with premature grey, and her expression was weary and haggard. Sherlock Holmes ran her over with one of his quick, all-comprehensive glances. You must not fear, said he soothingly, bending toward and patting her forearm. We shall soon set matters right, I have no doubt. You have come in by train this morning, I see. You know me, then? No, but I observed the second half of a return ticket in the palm of your left glove. You must have started early, and yet you had a good drive in a dog cart along heavy roads before you reached the station. The lady gave a violent start and stared in bewilderment at my companion. There is no mystery, my dear madam, said he, smiling. The left arm of your jacket is spattered with mud in no less than 7 places. The marks are perfectly fresh. There is no vehicle save a dog cart which throws up mud in that way, and then only when you sit on the left-hand side of the driver. Whatever your reasons may be, you are perfectly correct, said she. I started from home before 6, reached Leatherhead at 20 past, and came in by the first train to Waterloo. Sir, I can stand this strain no longer. I shall go mad if it continues. I have no one to turn to, none, save only one who cares for me, and he, poor fellow, can be of little aid. I have heard of you, Mr. Holmes. I have heard of you from Mrs. Farintosh, whom you helped in the hour of her sore need. It was from her that I had your address. Oh, sir, do you not think that you could help me, too, and at least throw a little light through the dense darkness which surrounds me? At present, it is out of my power to reward you for your service. But in a month, or 6 weeks, I shall be married, with the control of my own income. Then, at least, you shall not find me ungrateful. Holmes turned to his desk and, unlocking it, drew out a small case book, which he consulted. Farintosh, said he. Ah, yes, I recall the case. It was concerned with an opal tiara. I think it was before your time, Watson. I can only say, madam, that I shall be happy to devote the same care to your case as I did to that of your friend. As to reward, my profession is its own reward, but you are at liberty to defray whatever expenses I may be put to, at the time which suits you best. And now I beg that you will lay before us everything that may help us in forming an opinion upon the matter. Alas, replied our visitor, the very horror of my situation lies in the fact that my fears are so vague, and my suspicions depend so entirely upon small points which might seem trivial to another. Even he, to whom of all others I have a right to look for help and advice, looks upon all that I tell him about it as the fancies of a nervous woman. He does not say so, but I can read it from his soothing answers and averted eyes. But I have heard, Mr. Holmes, that you can see deeply into the manifold wickedness of the human heart. You may advise me how to walk amid the dangers which compass me. I am all attention, madam. My name is Helen Stoner, and I am living with my stepfather, who is the last survivor of one of the oldest Saxon families in England, the Roylotts of Stoke Moran, on the western border of Surrey. Holmes nodded his head. The name is familiar to me. The family was at one time among the richest in England, and the estates extended over the borders into Berkshire in the north and Hampshire in the west. In the last century, however, 4 successive heirs were of a dissolute and wasteful disposition, and the family ruin was eventually completed by a gambler in the days of the Regency. Nothing was left save a few acres of ground and the 200-year-old house, which is itself crushed under a heavy mortgage. The last squire dragged out his existence there, living the horrible life of an aristocratic pauper, but his only son, my stepfather, seeing that he must adapt himself to the new conditions, obtained an advance from a relative, which enabled him to take a medical degree and went out to Calcutta, where, by his professional skill and his force of character, he established a large practice. In a fit of anger, however, caused by some robberies which had been perpetrated in the house, he beat his native butler to death, and narrowly escaped a capital sentence. As it was, he suffered a long term of imprisonment afterwards, and afterwards returned to England, a morose and disappointed man. When Dr. Roylott was in India, he married my mother, Mrs. Stoner, the young widow of Major General Stoner of the Bengal Artillery. My sister Julia and I were twins, and we were only 2 years old at the time of my mother's remarriage. She had a considerable sum of money, not less than £1,000 a year, and this she bequeathed to Dr. Roylott entirely while we resided with him, with the provision that a certain annual sum should be allowed each of us in the event of our marriage. Shortly after I returned to England, my mother died, and she was killed 8 years ago in a railway accident near Crewe. Dr. Roylott then abandoned his attempts to establish himself in practice in London and took us to live with him in the old ancestral house at Stoke Moran. The money which my mother had left was enough for all our wants, and there seemed to be no obstacle to our happiness. But a terrible change came over our stepfather about this time. Instead of making friends and exchanging visits with our neighbors, who had first been overjoyed to see a Roylott of Stoke Moran back at this old family seat, he shut himself up in his house, and seldom came out save to indulge in ferocious quarrels with whomever might cross his path. Violence of temper approaching to mania has been hereditary in the men of the family, and in my stepfather's case it had, I believe, been intensified by his long residence in the tropics. A series of disgraceful brawls took place, 2 of which ended in the police court, until at last it became the terror of the village, and the folks would fly at his approach, for he is a man of immense strength and absolutely uncontrollable in his anger. Last week, he hurled the local blacksmith over a parapet into a stream, and it was only by paying over all the money which I could gather together that I was able to avert another public exposure. He had no friends at all, save the wandering gypsies, and he would give these vagabonds leave to encamp upon the few acres of bramble-covered land which represent the family estate, and would accept in return the hospitality of their tents, wandering away with them sometimes for weeks on end. He has a passion also for Indian animals, which are sent over to him by correspondent, and he has at this moment a cheetah and a baboon, which wander freely over his grounds and are feared by the villagers almost as much as their master. You can imagine from what I say that my poor sister Julia and I had no great pleasure in our lives. No servant would stay with us, and for a long time we did all the work of the house. She was but 30 at the time of her death, and yet her hair had already begun to whiten, even as mine has. Your sister is dead, then? She died just 2 weeks ago, and it is of her death that I wish to speak to you. You can understand that, living the life which I have described, we were little likely to see anyone of our own age and position. We had, however, an aunt, my mother's maiden sister, Miss Honoria Westphale, who lives near Harrow, and we were occasionally allowed to pay short visits at this lady's house. Julia went there at Christmas 2 years ago and met there a half-pay major of Marines, to whom she became engaged. My stepfather learned of the engagement when my sister returned and offered no objection to the marriage, but within a fortnight of the day which had been fixed for the wedding, the terrible event occurred which has deprived me of my only companion. Sherlock Holmes had been leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed and his head sunk in a cushion, but he half opened his lids now and glanced across at his visitor. Pray be precise as to details, said he. It's easy for me to be so, for every event of that dreadful time is seared into my memory. The Manor House is, as I have already said, very old, and only one wing is now inhabited. The bedrooms of this wing are on the ground floor, the sitting rooms being in the central block of buildings. Of these bedrooms, the first of Dr. Roylott's, the second is my sister's, and the third my own. There is no communication between them, but they all open out into the same corridor. Do I make myself plain? Perfectly so. The windows of the three rooms open out upon the lawn. That fatal night, Dr. Roylott had gone to his room early, though we knew that he had not retired to rest, for my sister was troubled by the smell of the strong Indian cigars, which it was his custom to smoke. She left her room, therefore, and came into mine, where she sat for some time chatting about her approaching wedding. At 11 o'clock she rose to leave me, but she paused at the door and looked back. "Tell me, Helen," said she, "have you ever heard anyone whistle in the dead of the night?" "Never," said I. "I suppose that you could not possibly whistle yourself in your sleep?" "Certainly not, but why?" "During the past few nights I have always, about 3 in the morning, heard a low, clear whistle. I'm a light sleeper, and it has awakened me. I cannot tell where it came from. Perhaps from the next room, perhaps from the lawn. I thought that I would just ask you whether you had heard it." "No, I have not. It must be one of those wretched gypsies in the plantation." "Very likely. And yet, if I were on the lawn, I wonder that you did not hear it also." "Well, but I sleep more heavily than you." "Well, it is of no great consequence at any rate." She smiled back at me, closed my door, and a few minutes later I heard the key turn in the lock. "Indeed," said Holmes. "Was it your custom always to lock yourselves in at night?" "Always." "And why?" "I think that I mentioned to you that the doctor kept a cheetah and a baboon. We had no feeling of security unless our doors were locked." "Quite so. Pray proceed with your statement." "I could not sleep that night. A vague feeling of impending misfortune impressed me. My sister and I, you will recollect, were twins. You know how subtle are the links which bind two souls that are so closely allied. It was a wild night. The wind was howling outside, and the rain was beating and splashing against the windows. Suddenly, amid all the hubbub of the gale, there burst forth the wild scream of a terrified woman. I knew that it was my sister's voice. I sprang from my bed, wrapped a shawl around me, and rushed into the corridor. As I opened my door, I seemed to hear a low whistle, such as my sister described, and a few moments later a clanging sound, as if a mass of metal had fallen. I ran down the passage. My sister's door was unlocked and revolved slowly upon its hinges. I stared at it, horror-stricken, not knowing what was about to issue from it. By the light of the corridor lamp, I saw my sister appear at the opening, her face blanched with terror, her hands groping for help, her whole figure swaying to and fro like that of a drunkard. I ran to her and threw my arms around her, but at that moment her knees seemed to give way, and she fell to the ground. She writhed as one who is in terrible pain, and her limbs were dreadfully convulsed. At first I thought that she had not recognized me, but as I bent over she suddenly shrieked in a voice which I shall never forget, "Oh my God! Helen, it was the band, the speckled band." There was something else which she would fain have said, and she stabbed with her finger into the air at the direction of the doctor's room, but in a fresh convulsion seized her. I choked her words. I rushed out, calling loudly for my stepfather, and I met him hastening from his room in his dressing gown. When he reached my sister's side, she was unconscious, and although he poured brandy down her throat and sent for medical aid from the village, all efforts were in vain. She slowly sank and died without having recovered her consciousness. Such was the dreadful end of my beloved sister. One moment, said Holmes. Are you sure about this whistle metallic sound? Could you swear to it? That was what the county coroner asked me at the inquiry. It is my strong impression that I heard it, and yet among the crash of the gale and the creaking of an old house, I may possibly have been deceived. Was your sister dressed? No, she was in her nightdress. In her right hand was found the charred stump of the match, and in her left a matchbox, showing that she had struck a light and looked about her when the alarm took place. That is important. And what conclusions did the coroner come to? He investigated the case with great care, for Dr. Roylott's conduct had long been notorious in the county, but he was unable to find any satisfactory cause of death. My evidence showed that the door had been fastened upon the inner side, and the windows were blocked by old-fashioned shutters with broad iron bars, which were secured every night. The walls were carefully sounded and were shown to be quite solid all around, and the flooring was also thoroughly examined with the same result. The chimney is wide, but is barred up by 4 large staples. It is certain, therefore, that my sister was quite alone when she met her end. Besides, there were no marks of any violence upon her. How about poison? The doctors examined her for it, but without success. What do you think that this unfortunate lady died of, then? It is my belief that she died of pure fear and nervous shock, though what it was that frightened her I cannot imagine. Were there gypsies in the plantation at the time? Yes, there are nearly always some there. Side note, excuse me. Guess who else has gypsies in the yard? Yes, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Good friends with the gypsies, but we're not allowed to call them gypsies. We call them Roma. Anyway, are we having fun yet? And what did you gather from this allusion to a band? A speckled band? Sometimes I have thought that it was merely the wild talk of delirium. Sometimes it may have referred to some band of people, perhaps to these very gypsies in the plantation. I do not know whether the spotted handkerchiefs which so many of them wear over their heads might have suggested the strange adjective which she used. Holmes shook his head like a man who was far from being satisfied. These are very deep waters, said he. Pray go on with your narrative. 2 years have passed since then, and my life has been until lately lonelier than ever. A month ago, however, a dear friend, whom I have known for many years, has done me the honor to ask my hand in marriage. His name is Armitage, Percy Armitage, the second son of Mr. Armitage, of Cranewater, near Reading. My stepfather has offered no opposition to the match, and we are to be married in the course of the spring. 2 days ago, some repairs were started in the west wing of the building, and my bedroom wall has been pierced, so that I have had to move into the chamber in which my sister died, and to sleep in the very bed in which she slept. Imagine then my thrill of terror when last night, as I lay awake, thinking over her terrible fate, I suddenly heard, in the silence of the night, the low whistle which had been the herald of her own death. I sprang up and lit the lamp, but nothing was to be seen in the room. I was too shaken to go to bed again. However, so I dressed, and as soon as it was daylight, I slipped down, got a dog cart at the Crown Inn, which is opposite, and drove to Leatherhead, from whence I have come on this morning, with the one object of seeing you and asking your advice. You have done wisely, said my friend. But have you told me all? Yes, all. Miss Roylott, you have not. You are screening your stepfather. Why, what do you mean? For answer, Holmes pulled back the frill of black lace which fringed the hand that lay upon our visitor's knee. 5 little livid spots, the marks of 4 fingers and a thumb, were printed upon the white wrist. "You have been cruelly used," said Holmes. The lady colored deeply and covered over her injured wrist. "He is a hard man," she said, "and perhaps he hardly knows his own strength." There was a long silence, during which Holmes leaned his chin upon his hands and stared into the crackling fire. "This is a very deep business," he said at last. "There are 1,000 details which I should desire to know before I decide upon the course of action. Yet we have not a moment to lose. If we were to come to Stoke Moran today, would it be possible for us to see over the rooms without knowledge of your stepfather?" "As it happens, he spoke of coming to town today upon some most important business. It is probable that he will be away all day, and there should be nothing to disturb you. We have a housekeeper now, but she is old and foolish, and I could easily get her out of the way." "Excellent. You're not averse to this trip, Watson?" "By no means." "Then we shall both come. What are you going to do yourself?" "I have 1 or 2 things which I should wish to do now that I'm in town, but I shall return by the 12 o'clock train, so as to be there in time for your coming." "And you may expect us early in the afternoon. I have myself some small business matters to attend to. Will you not wait and breakfast?" "No, I must go. My heart is lightened already since I have confided my trouble to you. I shall look forward to seeing you again this afternoon." She dropped her thick black veil over her face and glided from the room. "What do you think of it all, Watson?" asked Sherlock Holmes, leaning back in his chair. "It seems to me to be a most dark and sinister business." "Dark enough and sinister enough." "Yet if the lady's correct in saying that the flooring and the walls are sound, that the door, window, and the chimney are impassable, then her sister must have been undoubtedly alone when she met her mysterious end." "What becomes, then, of these nocturnal whistles, and what of the very peculiar words of the dying woman?" "I cannot think." "When you combine the idea of whistles at night, the presence of a band of gypsies who are on intimate terms with this old doctor, the fact that we have every reason to believe that the doctor has an interest in preventing his stepdaughter's marriage, the dying allusion to a man, and finally the fact that Miss Helen Stoner had heard a metallic clang, which might have been caused by one of those metal bars that secured the shutters falling back into its place, I think that there is a good ground to think that the mystery may be cleared upon those lines." "But what then did the gypsies do?" "I cannot imagine. I see many objections to any such theory." "And so do I. It is precisely for that reason that we are going to Stoke Moran this day. I want to see whether the objections are fatal, or whether they may be explained away. But what in the name of the devil?" The ejaculation had been drawn from my companion by the fact that our door had been suddenly dashed open, and that a huge man had framed himself in the aperture. His costume was a peculiar mixture of the professional and the agricultural, and having a black top hat, a long frock coat, and a pair of high gaiters, with the haunting crop swinging in his hand. So tall was he that his hat actually brushed across the bar of the doorway, and his breadth seemed to span across it from side to side. A large face, seared with 1,000 wrinkles, burned yellow with the sun, and marked with every evil passion, who has turned from one to the other of us, while his deep-set, bile-shot eyes and his high, thin, fleshless nose gave him somewhat the resemblance of a fierce old bird of prey. "Which of you is Holmes?" asked this apparition. "My name, sir, but you have the advantage of me," said my companion quietly. "I am Dr. Grimesby Roylott of Stoke Moran." "Indeed, doctor," said Holmes blandly. "Pray take a seat." "I will do nothing of the kind. My stepdaughter has been here. I have traced her. What has she been saying to you?" "Well, it's a little cold for the time of year," said Holmes. What has she been saying to you? Screamed the old man furiously. But I've heard that the crocuses promise well, continued my companion imperturbably. Ha! You put me off, do ya? Said our new visitor, taking a step forward and shaking his hunting crop. I know you, you scoundrel! I've heard of you before. You are Holmes, the meddler. My friend smiled. Holmes, the busybody! His smile broadened. Holmes, the Scotland Yard Jack in office. Holmes chuckled heartily. Your conversation is most entertaining, said he. When you go out, close the door, for there's a decided draught. I will go when I have had my say. Don't you dare to meddle with my affairs. I know that Miss Stoner's been here. I traced her. I'm a dangerous man to fall foul of. See here. He stepped swiftly forward, seized the poker, and bent it into a curve in his huge brown hands. See that you keep yourself out of my grip, he snarled, and hurling the twisted poker into the fireplace, he strode out of the room. Seems a very amiable person, said Holmes, laughing. I'm not quite so bulky, but if he had remained, I might have shown him that my grip was not much more feeble than his own. As he spoke, he picked up the steel poker, and with a sudden effort, straightened it out again. Fancy his having the insolence to confound me with the official detective force. This incident gives zest to our investigation, however, and I only trust that our little friend will not suffer from her imprudence in allowing this brute to trace her. And now, Watson, we shall order breakfast, and afterwards I shall walk down to Doctor's Commons, where I hope to get some data which may help us in this matter. It was nearly 1 o'clock when Sherlock Holmes returned from his excursion. He held in his hand a sheet of blue paper, scrawled over with notes and figures. I have seen the will of the deceased wife, said he. To determine its exact meaning, I have been obliged to work out the present prices of the investments with which it is concerned. The total income at the time of the wife's death was little short of £1,100. Now, through the fall in agricultural prices, not more than £750. Each daughter can claim an income of £250 in case of marriage. It is evident, therefore, that if both girls had married, this beauty would have had a mere pittance, while even one of them would cripple him to a very serious extent. My morning's work has not been wasted, since it has proved that he has the very strongest motives for standing in the way of anything of the sort. Now, Watson, this is too serious for dawdling, especially as the open man is aware that we're interesting ourselves in his affairs. So, if you're ready, we shall call a cab and drive to Waterloo. I should be very much obliged if you would slip your revolver into your pocket, and Ailey's number 2 is an excellent argument with gentlemen who can twist steel pokers into knots. That and a toothbrush are, I think, all that we need. At Waterloo, we were fortunate in catching a train for Leatherhead, where we hired a trap at the station inn and drove for 4 or 5 miles through the lovely Surrey lanes. It was a perfect day, with a bright sun and a few fleecy clouds in the heavens. The trees and wayside hedges were just throwing out their first green shoots, and the air was full of the pleasant smell of the moist earth. To me, at least, there was a strange contrast between the sweet promise of the spring and this sinister quest upon which we were engaged. My companion sat in the front of the trap, his arms folded, his hat pulled down over his eyes, and a chin sunk upon his breast, buried in the deepest thought. Or sleep. Suddenly, however, he started, tapped me on the shoulder, and pointed over the meadows. Look there, said he. A heavily timbered park stretched up in a gentle slope, thickening into a grove at the highest point. From amid the branches there jutted out the grey gables and high roof tree of the very old mansion. Stoke Moran? Said he. Yes, sir. That be the house. Yes, sir. That be the house of Dr. Grimesby Roylott, remarked the driver. There is some building going on there, said Holmes. That's where we are going. And guess what, my friends? This is it for tonight's episode of Storytelling Live. Thank you very much for watching. We will continue. We will end this next week. Or you can fast forward and just find this story on your own and read it. Do read it. But I enjoy reading it to you. And I hope to see you next week. I will be here. Thank you. This has been fun. Leave a comment. Drop me a line. Subscribe. There are things going on, and I can tell you about it privately. And I will talk to you very soon. Kindest things. Best of health to you, and much happiness and safety. Thank you. Good night.